He was teetering on the edge of collapse, balancing on a tightrope spun from fury and desperation, convinced that his only way to survive was to fight with fists raised and heart sealed behind walls of stubborn pride. No one in his neighborhood believed he could rise above the chaos that stained every street corner. But there was an undeniable spark in his eyes, a fiery defiance that warned anyone willing to cross his path that he had something unique locked beneath the anger. His name was Marcus, an 18-year-old who had learned that respect could be taken more easily than it could be earned. He had grown up in one of the roughest pockets of Chicago, surrounded by towering gray buildings that always looked as if they were scowling down at everyone who walked beneath. Gangs thrived like weeds in the cracked sidewalks. Marcus never wanted to join them, but he found himself pulled into their orbit. He never fully pledged loyalty to any gang, but they recognized his raw ferocity and his fists that moved faster than most people could blink. Therefore they circled him, hoping to harness that power for themselves, pushing him into street fights and letting him brawl for money. Those who watched quickly realized Marcus had an uncanny way of reading movements, a near supernatural sense of timing that allowed him to react before his opponents could think. He took punches that would make other people buckle, but he refused to go down. His body was scarred with proof that he had stood against odds many times his size. But his victories on the street only hardened his belief that fighting was his sole purpose. Every day he woke up in a cramped apartment shared with an aunt who barely recognized his existence, stumbling out into a world that seemed eager to provoke him. He had the reflexes and fists of a future champion, yet no sense of direction. Most nights he found himself in illegal back-alley boxing matches or street brawls arranged by local hustlers. Adrenaline was his companion, anger his fuel, and each dawn he woke up more convinced that he was bound to a destiny of bloodied fists and shattered dreams. Yet it was on one of those brutal nights, hidden behind a rundown gym, where two men dragged Marcus into the ring to fight a challenger almost twice his size. The makeshift ring was little more than roped-off pavement, lit by flickering bulbs that swung overhead. A ragged crowd gathered around, shouting insults and encouragement, while money changed hands in sweaty palms. The tension in the air was suffocating. Marcus stepped forward, arms raised, eyes locked on the looming figure who breathed heavily across from him. A hush fell as the fight began, and Marcus felt the crack of knuckles against his jaw. But he refused to crumble. He retaliated with lightning combinations that left the bigger man stumbling. Through the swirl of dust and shouts, Marcus let his fury guide him. Blows rained upon him, but he powered forward, ignoring the pain. He caught the man with a left hook so quick that many onlookers had to blink twice to realize what had happened. The larger man collapsed with a thud that reverberated along the pavement. Marcus stood victorious in the circle of battered asphalt, chest heaving, fist sore, forehead dripping sweat. People cheered but also looked at him with a strange wariness, as though they were wondering if he was even human. Off to the side, someone observed with focused attention. That someone was Chuck Norris, who had come to the city on a personal visit, quietly meeting with an old friend who ran a legitimate boxing gym just a few blocks away. Chuck had heard rumors of a fierce kid who could outfight almost anyone, a hot-headed brawler who had talent beyond measure but zero discipline. Chuck didn't plan on seeking the kid out that night, but when he heard the rumors of an underground match happening near that deserted gym, his curiosity got the better of him. He arrived and watched from the fringes, hiding in the shadow of a chain-link fence. The moment he witnessed Marcus land that decisive blow, he recognized the raw power in the young fighter, but he also sensed the wild, untamed spirit that burned behind those eyes. Therefore Chuck waited until the makeshift crowd dispersed. Some left quickly, not wanting to be around when the cops inevitably cruised by. Others lingered, discussing what they had just witnessed. Marcus wiped blood off his lips and stepped away, shoulders hunched. He didn't anticipate what was waiting for him as he turned the corner. Chuck Norris stood there casually, arms folded, face calm yet commanding. Marcus froze. He might have been the toughest fighter on these streets, but he was unprepared for the presence of a legend, someone whose name was synonymous with invincibility. Chuck spoke softly, commending Marcus on his performance. He told the young man he had seen enough to know there was a spark of greatness beneath the anger. But Marcus responded with suspicion, demanding to know who Chuck was. Chuck gave a polite smile and said maybe he could help Marcus find a better path, maybe offer a safer ring where he could fight for real glory rather than scraps of blood money. Marcus scoffed, tossing a dismissive gesture and walking away. But Chuck followed him, maintaining a respectful distance, speaking words of wisdom and discipline that Marcus had never heard from any adult in his entire life. Still, Marcus wanted no part of it. He spat back that he didn't need charity or pity. Chuck refused to be provoked. Instead, he quietly gave Marcus a location, the legitimate boxing gym nearby, and told him to stop by if he ever felt the streets closing in. Marcus sneered, but he pocketed the slip of paper Chuck handed him. Chuck left him alone afterward, disappearing into the night with a confident stride that hinted at total self-control. Marcus stood there in the weak glow of a street lamp, fingers clenched around the paper, uncertain why he hadn't just thrown it away. The next morning, Marcus woke with a throbbing bruise under his left eye, a memento from the previous night's fight. His aunt barely acknowledged him as he shuffled out of the apartment, rummaging for some stale cereal. The TV blared from another room, showing local news about gang violence, and Marcus felt a sudden heaviness in his gut. He remembered Chuck's calm gaze, the quiet confidence of a man who had seen it all and emerged stronger. Marcus debated ignoring that memory, but something inside him itched. He left the apartment and wandered the city, stepping past graffiti-stained walls and broken windows. By mid-afternoon, he found himself standing before the very gym Chuck had mentioned. It looked old but well-maintained, with painted windows featuring silhouettes of boxers in mid-stance. Marcus hesitated, reminding himself he didn't need anyone's guidance. But curiosity nudged him forward. He pushed open the doors and was greeted by the scent of sweat, rubber, and leather. Men and women were training inside, hammering punching bags, skipping rope, and practicing with mitts. At the far corner stood Chuck Norris, quietly watching a young man spar with an older coach. Chuck spotted Marcus and walked over, greeting him warmly. Marcus tried to hide his nerves behind a smirk, asking if Chuck had brought him there just to watch a bunch of amateurs throw weak punches. Chuck only smiled, inviting him to step into the ring and see if any of the fighters could keep up with Marcus's speed. Marcus accepted the challenge, stepping between the ropes with confidence. A tall boxer approached, wearing official gloves, eyeing Marcus with curiosity. Chuck took on the role of referee, instructing them to keep it clean. The moment the sparring started, Marcus unleashed a flurry of blows. He was a whirlwind of fists, intensity crackling in the air around him. But unlike the street fights, this bout had structure. The other boxer was skilled, blocking efficiently, moving with practiced footwork. Marcus connected a few times, but he began to realize he was missing something crucial. He relied solely on raw aggression, with no strategy or technique. As the sparring continued, the other boxer found openings Marcus couldn't anticipate. Marcus took a few punishing hits to the ribs, and though he didn't fold, he gasped for breath. But that only fueled his anger further, causing him to throw reckless shots that left him open for counterattacks. The match ended with Marcus visibly frustrated, panting, and glaring across the ring. Chuck stepped in, telling Marcus he had power that couldn't be taught, but lacked discipline. Marcus was furious. He snapped back, declaring that if he had been allowed to fight like he usually did, the outcome would be different. Chuck calmly responded that true power comes from control, not from unrestrained anger. Marcus muttered curses under his breath, but part of him recognized that Chuck was right. Therefore Marcus agreed to stay a while, just to see if there was anything worth learning in that dusty gym. Day after day he returned, drawn by a mixture of stubborn pride and curiosity. Chuck devoted time to him, teaching him how to channel his rage into precise strikes rather than wild swings. He taught him how to dodge efficiently, how to read opponents' tells, how to conserve energy instead of burning it all in the first minute. Marcus resisted at first, failing to understand why discipline mattered if he was still able to land hits. But Chuck explained that longevity in the ring required more than strength. It required a sharp mind, an iron will, and the humility to learn from mistakes. Marcus still sparred with other fighters, gradually recognizing that while he could outmuscle many, those with superior technique exposed his weaknesses. Each time he got knocked around, a humbling realization sank deeper into his bones. He wasn't invincible. He had relied too long on brutality that worked on the streets but faltered under controlled conditions. Therefore, he listened more closely to Chuck, who dissected every sparring session with a quiet thoroughness that amazed Marcus. Chuck never lost patience, even when Marcus's temper flared and he shouted in frustration. Chuck simply waited until the storm passed, offering constructive criticism and encouragement in equal measure. Over the next few weeks, Marcus's body and mindset evolved. He woke earlier to run through the city streets at dawn, letting the crisp air fill his lungs as he replayed Chuck's advice in his head. He spent hours perfecting his stance in front of a mirror at the gym, focusing on balance and posture. He hit the heavy bag with precise combinations, refining his footwork until it became second nature. The older fighters in the gym began noticing the transformation. Marcus was still fiery, but there was a sharper edge to his skills now. He defended more instead of throwing himself blindly into each exchange. He used footwork to create angles that left his sparring partners guessing. The improvement was impossible to miss. But outside the gym, the streets didn't forget Marcus. Some of the men who profited from his underground fights were unhappy to see him training under Chuck's guidance. They tried to lure him back, reminding him of quick cash and the reputation he'd built as an unstoppable brawler. Marcus felt torn between the promise of a better future and the familiarity of old habits. One evening, a group of dangerous individuals cornered him in an alley, demanding he return to the underground scene. They insisted that Chuck's mentorship was a useless fantasy, that he could never escape the streets. Marcus clenched his fists, fury igniting within him. But he remembered Chuck's words about control. He took a deep breath, choosing his response carefully. He refused to be their puppet. But they pressed harder, one man stepping forward to slam a fist against Marcus's jaw. Instinct nearly made Marcus lash out with lethal force, but he caught himself, blocking the next strike gracefully before delivering a swift blow that dropped the man to his knees. The others backed off, startled by the precision and restraint Marcus displayed. Marcus warned them he wouldn't fight for them anymore, and if they came at him again, he wouldn't hesitate to defend himself. Therefore the men slunk away, cursing under their breath, promising retribution. Marcus stood there with adrenaline thrumming through his veins, wondering if he had just signed his own death warrant. But the sense of purpose he felt at that moment outweighed the fear. The next day, Chuck noticed a bruise forming on Marcus's cheek and asked what had happened. Marcus explained the confrontation, and Chuck nodded gravely, warning him that true change would always face resistance. But Chuck also reassured him that the more he improved, the less those old patterns could claim him. Marcus doubled down on his training. He spent long nights perfecting the jab, cross, hook sequences Chuck taught him, focusing on every detail, from the rotation of his hips to the positioning of his shoulders. He practiced slipping and weaving, learning how to avoid blows without wasting motion. Gradually he began sparring with some of the gym's better fighters, and while he still lost occasionally, his losses became lessons rather than bitter defeats. Chuck introduced Marcus to others as a prodigy in need of guidance. Marcus felt a flicker of pride whenever he heard Chuck speak about him that way. Yet there were nights when he couldn't sleep because distant sirens and gunshots reminded him that danger was never far behind. One afternoon, Chuck pulled Marcus aside and revealed plans for a local amateur boxing tournament. It was a chance to compete in a legitimate environment, to show the neighborhood that Marcus could do more than street fight for shady characters. Marcus's initial reaction was a rush of excitement. But then anxiety tightened his chest. He worried that he wasn't ready, that he couldn't handle the pressure. Chuck assured him that fear was natural, but so was overcoming it. Marcus agreed to enter, realizing this was his chance to prove himself not just to Chuck but to everyone who had ever doubted him. Training for the tournament became Marcus's obsession. He ran extra miles, pushed his endurance on the heavy bag, and spent hours shadowboxing after official gym hours. Chuck supervised, offering calm direction. He insisted that Marcus learn to keep his composure in the ring, reminding him that a real champion doesn't let anger blur his focus. Marcus tried to internalize that advice, though it wasn't easy. He had spent years letting his temper guide him, and now he had to unlearn that habit. At the weigh-in for the tournament, Marcus stood beside fighters from different parts of the city. Some recognized him from his days on the street, greeting him with curiosity or disdain. Others didn't know him but noticed the intensity in his eyes. Chuck stayed by his side, offering words of encouragement. When Marcus stepped onto the scale, he felt the eyes of the room upon him, as though everyone wondered if he truly belonged there. He passed the weigh-in, then faced his first match the following day. The venue was a modest community center turned into a boxing arena, complete with a regulation ring, bright lights, and bleachers packed with spectators. Marcus couldn't help but remember the bare-knuckle fights in grimy back alleys. He reminded himself that this was different, a legitimate stage where his skill could shine without the taint of illegal gambling or gangster demands. Chuck patted his shoulder, whispering final advice: breathe, stay calm, let the training guide every move. When the bell rang, Marcus faced an opponent who was quick, experienced, and more polished. Early on, Marcus took some hits to the body that reminded him he was in a new league. But he quickly adapted, recalling Chuck's lessons on defense, pivoting to create space, waiting for the right moment to strike. In the second round, Marcus found his rhythm. He feinted, then lunged with a crisp combination that stunned his rival. The crowd roared as Marcus built momentum, systematically breaking down his opponent's guard. It wasn't anger driving him now, it was focus. He controlled his power, landing precise punches that showcased his evolution from brawler to boxer. By the end of the third round, Marcus was declared the winner by unanimous decision. He felt a rush of joy, unlike anything he had known. He scanned the crowd and found Chuck, who gave him a subtle nod of approval. Over the course of the tournament, Marcus advanced through each bracket. The matches grew tougher, the opponents more skilled. But he adapted to every style, drawing on everything Chuck had taught him, and also tapping into that raw ferocity that set him apart. He fought methodically, staying composed even when he took damaging hits. He learned to let go of the street instincts that once made him wild. He discovered that victory felt sweeter when it was earned through discipline and technique rather than brute force. During the semifinals, Marcus encountered a boxer with superior experience, a regional champion who moved with fluid grace. The fight was punishing. Marcus nearly buckled under the man's relentless jabs and combinations, feeling exhaustion creep in. His vision blurred at times, sweat stinging his eyes. But he reminded himself of Chuck's training, digging deep for a second wind. Therefore he adjusted his strategy, using footwork to slip the champion's barrage, launching counters that scored vital points. When the final bell rang, Marcus barely stood, lungs burning, arms heavy. The judges announced a close decision in favor of Marcus. He stood there, adrenaline surging, the crowd roaring. That's when it hit him. He had done what many believed was impossible. That night, Chuck found him in the locker room, where Marcus sat in silence, grappling with disbelief. Chuck congratulated him, telling him that everyone had witnessed not just a great fight, but the birth of a disciplined warrior. Marcus stared at Chuck with a mixture of gratitude and respect, realizing just how far he had come from the angry kid who scoffed at the idea of self-control. The finals arrived. Marcus stepped into the ring before the largest crowd of the tournament. His opponent was a powerful puncher with knockout victories in his previous bouts. The tension in the air was almost tangible. The referee signaled the start, and both fighters circled, testing each other's range. Marcus avoided falling back into old habits, keeping his composure. He absorbed some hard shots but refused to let fear or anger overwhelm him. Then he unleashed his own skill, combining the fiery aggression he once relied on with the technique Chuck had instilled in him. Each round was a battle of wills. Either fighter backed down. Every exchange made the spectators gasp. In the final round, Marcus sensed his opponent weakening. He capitalized on a slight drop in the guard, connecting with a left hook that rattled bones. The opponent staggered, and Marcus pressed the advantage, delivering a combination that secured a decisive victory. The bell rang, and the crowd erupted. Marcus stood in the center of the ring, sweat-soaked, arms raised, a triumphant grin on his face. The judge lifted his glove in victory, announcing him as the tournament champion. Confetti fell, cameras flashed, and Marcus felt a whirlwind of emotions wash over him. He caught sight of Chuck watching from ringside, eyes filled with pride. After receiving his trophy, Marcus made his way through the throng of well-wishers and congratulatory slaps on the back. He found Chuck, who offered a handshake that turned into a brief embrace. Chuck told him that true victory is measured by how much you've grown, not just by how many opponents you defeat. Marcus nodded. He understood that now. Outside the venue, the night air felt electrifying. Marcus glanced around, seeing familiar faces from the neighborhood who had come to witness his journey. Some waved, others simply looked on with admiration. But he also spotted a few of the same men who once tried to drag him back to the streets. They stared with a mixture of resentment and reluctant respect. Marcus recognized the path he had chosen. He wouldn't go back. He had found purpose in this legitimate pursuit, guided by a legend who believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. Chuck walked beside him, congratulating him again on his victory, mentioning that this was just the beginning. There would be other tournaments, bigger stages, and more opportunities to grow. Marcus felt a surge of optimism about the future. The old version of him would have never thought beyond the next fight, but now he dared to dream of championships, of respect earned through skill and discipline. He knew there would be challenges. The world outside the ring was still filled with pitfalls. But he carried a newfound confidence, fueled by the knowledge that he had transformed from a hot-headed brawler into a refined fighter with a heart set on proving he belonged in the realm of legitimate boxing. Chuck parted ways with Marcus later that night, stepping into a parked car that would take him to a dinner meeting. Before getting in, he paused, turning back to Marcus with one last piece of advice: never lose sight of where he came from, and never let arrogance rob him of the humility he needed to stay sharp. Marcus promised to remember those words. Then he stood on the sidewalk, the tournament trophy cradled under one arm, the street lamp illuminating him like a spotlight. Passers-by glanced curiously, some recognizing him from the news coverage of the event. He felt a spark of pride. He had discovered a different path, one that demanded more from him than he ever realized he could give. But he had found a mentor in Chuck Norris who showed him that greatness wasn't just about raw power. It was about discipline, respect, and the willingness to fight with honor. As midnight approached, Marcus headed home, mind buzzing with plans. The rundown neighborhoods he passed seemed a little less daunting now. He had a future that stretched beyond street corners and alley fights. The weight of that old life lingered like a shadow, but it no longer chained him. He walked faster, eager to tell his aunt that he had won a trophy. He didn't know if she would care, but he wanted to try. The days that followed were filled with new opportunities. People started approaching Marcus about more professional fights. He spent hours each morning training at the gym, polishing his technique under Chuck's occasional supervision. Sometimes Chuck had to be away, fulfilling obligations or personal engagements, but he never failed to check on Marcus's progress. The calls from shady figures still came, offering quick money for unsanctioned brawls, but Marcus learned how to ignore them. The gym became his sanctuary, a place where he could focus his intensity and cultivate the skills that would define his future. The transformation was impossible to ignore. He had stepped away from the brink of ruin, guided by a man whose quiet wisdom carried more weight than 1,000 street hustlers combined. Marcus's name began circulating in local boxing circles as the underdog who had snatched the amateur title from experienced fighters. But the real victory, in Chuck's eyes, was that Marcus no longer felt consumed by fury. He channeled his emotions into training, pushing himself in ways he never would have dreamed of before. He managed to cut ties with the troublemakers who once latched onto him like parasites. He found friends who supported his goals, forging connections with fellow fighters who shared his passion. The shift wasn't easy. There were nights when memories of the streets haunted him, taunting him with old temptations. But each time he felt the pull of that darkness, he recalled Chuck's unwavering gaze, the sound of gloves meeting the heavy bag, the cheers of the crowd when his hand was raised in victory. Therefore he pressed forward, refusing to let doubt and anger reclaim him. Word spread about Chuck Norris taking a personal interest in Marcus, and that alone carried significant weight. Promoters reached out, offering a chance to sign him for bigger matches. He still had a long road to travel, and Chuck advised him not to rush. Better to build a solid foundation than to jump into professional circuits unprepared. Marcus listened, absorbing the importance of patience, realizing he had an entire career ahead of him if he handled this correctly. Months turned into a year, and Marcus continued to gather momentum. He entered more tournaments, honing his ability against fighters who challenged him in new ways. Each victory strengthened his resolve, but he also learned to handle losses with grace, analyzing mistakes and returning to training with renewed dedication. His community started looking at him differently. Local kids who once feared him for his aggressive reputation now saw him as a role model. Marcus felt the responsibility, understanding that his transformation could inspire others to break free from destructive cycles. Through all of this, Chuck maintained a presence in Marcus's life, sometimes showing up unannounced at the gym to give pointers, or calling late at night to check on his mental state before a big match. Chuck never bragged about his part in Marcus's success. He simply reminded Marcus that every champion has mentors, and the best mentors encourage independence rather than dependence. Eventually, Marcus found himself at a crossroads. Professional scouts began contacting him about turning pro. It was a step that could bring serious money and media attention, but also came with immense pressure. Chuck sat Marcus down and spoke to him about the ramifications. Marcus felt both excitement and fear. But with Chuck's guidance, he decided to proceed carefully, working on forging deals that wouldn't exploit him. He wanted to ensure he had a supportive team in place. That was the final piece of advice Chuck gave him face to face before heading out of town for a while. Never sign anything blindly, never let ambition blind him to the dangers of predatory contracts, and always remember that dignity and self-respect are worth more than any sum of money. The day Chuck left, Marcus watched him go with a mix of gratitude and sadness. He knew Chuck wasn't abandoning him. They kept in touch by phone, exchanging updates about training schedules and potential matches. Yet Marcus felt the weight of standing on his own. He realized that Chuck's purpose was never to fight his battles for him, but to equip him with the mindset and skill set to become his own champion. Now Marcus was the young boxer with a story behind every scar, a fighter with a name that carried respect, someone who had once stalked the violent backstreets of Chicago, but had now emerged as a rising star in the legitimate boxing world. Every time he climbed into the ring, he felt a surge of gratitude to the man who first recognized his potential amidst the rubble of anger. Chuck Norris had offered him a different path. Marcus had accepted that offer, forging a bond that shaped the course of his life forever. The echoes of his old environment sometimes tried to pull him back, but he had tasted something more profound, the joy of accomplishing feats he once believed were impossible. That taste lingered, feeding his determination to keep going, to set an example for anyone else trapped in cycles of violence. He would gladly share that message with anyone who asked. It wasn't about how hard you could hit, but about why you were fighting in the first place. Late one night, as Marcus stood alone in the old gym, letting the echoes of punches and cheers replay in his mind, he realized his journey was just beginning. There was a world of opportunities awaiting him, championships that could be won through dedication, not rage. He smiled, recalling Chuck's last words before departing. "Stay hungry for growth, but stay humble in spirit." Marcus intended to do just that. He exited the gym with a renewed sense of purpose, stepping into the darkness of a city that no longer felt like a trap. He lifted his gaze toward the distant skyline, thinking about the battles yet to come. He had discovered a destiny that surpassed any shallow street reputation. He walked faster, heading toward a future he was determined to shape with his own two hands. His transformation was undeniable, his dreams within reach. The fists that once only knew how to destroy could now defend hope. Therefore he embraced that hope fully, determined to rise as a champion in both the ring and the challenges of life. The next morning, Marcus awoke with a grin, ready to train. He couldn't wait to see what lay ahead. Because now he fought not out of desperation, but out of genuine passion, guided by discipline that elevated him beyond the person he once was. He might stumble, but he refused to fall back. There was too much at stake, too many people looking up to him, and one legendary mentor who had entrusted him to carry on the legacy of honorable combat. With that conviction bolstering every step, he prepared to face whatever awaited him. The city would test him again. So would the ring. But he felt prepared. He had already proven he could stand on the brink of ruin and choose a different path. Therefore he walked forward, unafraid of the unknown. His story would continue to unfold, fueled by the guidance Chuck Norris had provided and the unstoppable spirit Marcus had forged. Watch the next Chuck Norris stories on our channel, because his adventures never end and neither does the inspiration he leaves behind.